I was 28 when my doorbell rang at 2 a.m. in March, a sound that pierced the quiet of my small apartment like a scream in the night. My heart pounded as I stumbled out of bed, the cool hardwood floor chilling my bare feet, wondering who could be out there in the darkness. Thomas, my husband of 6 years, had left just 2 weeks earlier for a year-long work assignment in Europe, leaving me alone in our one-bedroom place with its familiar smells of coffee and his lingering cologne. I peered through the peephole and saw my sister Janet, her face shadowed and frantic with 3 small figures huddled behind her, her kids, Hunter, Annie, and Grace. What fresh chaos was this? Janet had always been the wild card in our family, bouncing from one bad choice to another, but showing up like this hinted at something far worse brewing beneath the surface. I opened the door cautiously, the chain still latched, and a gust of cold night air rushed in, carrying the faint scent of rain and desperation. Janet looked disheveled, her hair matted, makeup streaked, clutching a crumpled envelope. Behind her, Hunter, the oldest at around 8, stared at the ground with wide eyes, holding a black trash bag that sagged like it carried the weight of their lives. Annie, maybe 6, clung to his side, her small hand gripping his shirt, while little Grace, barely 4, rubbed her eyes sleepily, thumb in her mouth. "They're yours now," Janet said flatly, shoving the envelope into my hands. "I need a break. Can't do this anymore." Her voice was edged with exhaustion, but there was no regret, just a cold finality that made my stomach twist. Before I could process her words, she turned and walked toward a waiting car idling at the curb, its headlights cutting through the misty night like accusatory beams. The kids watched silently as their mother climbed in, the door slamming with a thud that echoed in my chest. The car peeled away, tires squealing faintly on the wet pavement, leaving behind the acrid smell of exhaust and abandonment. I stood there frozen, the envelope crinkling in my fist, as Hunter finally looked up at me, his eyes glistening but dry. No tears, just a hollow resignation that broke my heart. "Mom said you'd take care of us," he whispered, his voice small against the night's silence. I ushered them inside quickly, the door clicking shut behind us, sealing in the sudden reality of 4 lives crammed into a space meant for 2. The apartment felt even smaller now, the living room lamp casting long shadows on the walls, lined with Thomas's old books and our wedding photos. I knelt down to their level, trying to steady my breathing, the envelope still unopened in my hand. It contained unsigned guardianship papers she'd printed from some shady website, flimsy, worthless things that screamed of her impulsiveness. Legally, they meant nothing, but in that moment, with 3 scared kids staring at me, they felt like a bomb about to detonate. My mind raced. Janet had pulled stunts before, disappearing for weeks, leaving the kids with random friends or even once with our distant aunt. But this, dumping them like unwanted luggage? I knew I couldn't just stand there. I had to act. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator's calm voice a stark contrast to the panic bubbling inside me. "My sister just left her 3 children with me and drove off," I explained, my words tumbling out as I paced the kitchen, the tile cold underfoot. The kids sat on the couch, trash bags at their feet, Grace starting to whimper softly. Hunter shushed her gently, his little shoulders bearing too much already. The police arrived within 20 minutes, 2 officers in crisp uniforms knocking firmly, their radios crackling with static. They took my statement in the living room, notebooks out, while I tried to keep the kids distracted with some juice from the fridge, the sweet apple scent mixing oddly with the tension. "Since they're with family and not in immediate danger, this isn't abandonment in the legal sense," one officer said, his tone sympathetic but firm. "Contact Child Protective Services first thing in the morning." They filed a report, photographed the envelope, and left, promising to follow up if Janet resurfaced. As their cruiser pulled away, the red and blue lights fading into the night, I felt utterly alone, the weight of responsibility crashing down like a wave. That first night was a blur of shock and makeshift arrangements. All 3 kids ended up in my bed, their small bodies curled under the comforter that still smelled faintly of Thomas's shampoo. I took the couch, but sleep evaded me. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, listening to their uneven breaths. Hunter didn't sleep at all. He sat up watching the door, as if expecting Janet to burst back in any second. his silhouette rigid in the dim light from the street lamp outside. Annie cried silently, her sobs muffled into the pillow, while Grace wet the bed sometime around dawn, the warm dampness spreading and adding to the chaos. I changed the sheets quietly, my hands shaking, whispering reassurances I barely believed myself. By morning, the apartment buzzed with uneasy energy. I made breakfast. Simple toast and eggs, the sizzle in the pan a feeble attempt at normalcy, while the kids picked at their food, eyes downcast. Hunter asked quietly if their mom was coming back soon, and I had no answer, just a forced smile and a promise to figure it out. I called CPS as soon as their office opened, my voice steady despite the knot in my throat. They opened a case immediately, and a caseworker named Scott arrived that afternoon to inspect the apartment. He was kind, middle-aged with a reassuring demeanor, walking through the cramped space, noting the single bedroom and lack of extra beds. "You can apply for emergency kinship care status," he explained, sitting at my kitchen table with a stack of forms. "It'll give you temporary legal authority and some financial help while we locate your sister." The process moved quickly, thank goodness. Scott helped me gather what I needed: birth certificates from Janet's old records I'd kept for emergencies, proof of relation, and by evening I had temporary custody papers. It came with a small stipend, enough to buy basics like extra clothes and bedding, but not much more. I enrolled the kids in the local school on an emergency basis, the principal sympathetic after hearing the story, though she warned we'd need full documentation within 30 days. The counselor there flagged issues right away. Grace had been unwashed for weeks before this, Hunter's homework neglected for months, Annie caught stealing lunch items. It painted a grim picture of life with Janet, one I'd suspected but never fully known. Thomas video called that night from his hotel in Europe, his face pixelated on the screen, shock evident even through the lag. "What the hell happened?" he asked, running a hand through his hair. I recounted it all, the words spilling out as the kids played quietly in the background with some old toys I'd dug out. He offered to fly home immediately, but his contract had harsh penalties for early termination, lost pay, potential lawsuits. We talked it over, deciding he should stay. I'd handle this, somehow. But as we hung up, his "I love you" felt distant, like an echo across the ocean. The days blurred into a routine of survival. I juggled my day job with nighttime worries, the apartment filled with new sounds, Grace's giggles mixed with nightmares, Annie's soft questions about her mom, Hunter's watchful silence. I tracked down Janet's ex-boyfriend, Damien, through old contacts. He confirmed she'd run off to Vegas with a younger guy, complaining the kids held her back. No remorse, just selfishness. CPS kept tabs, Scott visiting weekly, arranging childcare when I worked late. My savings dipped low, but the kinship stipend helped with groceries, the scent of fresh bread a small comfort. Yet beneath it all, a tension simmered. Thomas's calls grew sporadic, his project complications extending his stay. The kids adapted slowly. Hunter helped with chores without asking. Annie drew pictures of our new family. Grace called me Auntie Mom by accident. But nights were hard. I'd lie awake, wondering if Janet would ever return, or if this was our new normal. Little did I know, the real storm was just beginning, with secrets and betrayals waiting in the shadows. As the weeks stretched into months, the initial shock of that midnight abandonment began to settle into a grinding routine, one that tested every ounce of my resolve in ways I never imagined. My one-bedroom apartment, once a cozy haven for Thomas and me, now felt like a pressure cooker, bursting at the seams with the energy of 3 displaced kids. Mornings started early, the alarm blaring at 5 a.m., so I could squeeze in a quick shower before waking them. Hunter first. Always the lightest sleeper, his eyes snapping open like he'd been waiting for the day to start. The scent of oatmeal bubbling on the stove mixed with the faint mustiness of clothes piled in corners, reminders that our laundry routine was still haphazard at best. I'd portion out breakfast on mismatched plates, urging them to eat while I packed lunches. Peanut butter sandwiches for Annie, who was picky about textures, apple slices for Grace, who chewed everything slowly like she was savoring a rare treat, and whatever was left for Hunter, who ate mechanically, his mind elsewhere. School became our anchor, but getting there was a hurdle in itself. With Scott's help from CPS, I managed emergency enrollment at the local elementary, a brick building just a few blocks away that smelled of chalk and cafeteria lunches. The first day, I walked them there, holding Grace's tiny hand, while Hunter carried his sister's backpacks, his own slung over one shoulder like a shield. The principal, a stern but kind woman with glasses perched on her nose, reviewed the temporary papers and nodded. "We'll need birth certificates and immunization records soon," she said, her voice echoing in the empty hallway. But the counselor pulled me aside after observing the kids in class, Grace arriving unwashed and withdrawn, Hunter's blank homework folders from his old school, Annie's habit of hoarding snacks from other kids' trays. "These signs point to neglect," she whispered, her concern genuine, and she looped back to CPS, strengthening our case but also highlighting how deep the damage ran. Financially, it was a tightrope walk over an abyss. The kinship care stipend kicked in after a couple of weeks, about $400 a month per child, enough for basics like groceries and school supplies, but not the extras that make life feel normal. My savings, built carefully over years with Thomas, dwindled fast. New shoes for growing feet, a second-hand bunk bed squeezed into the bedroom corner, therapy toys recommended by Scott to help with their trauma. By month 2, I'd taken a second job waitressing nights at a local diner, the greasy smell of fries clinging to my uniform as I slipped in after midnight, collapsing on the couch for 4 hours of fractured sleep. Scott arranged licensed childcare for those shifts. A neighbor down the hall who charged minimally, her apartment filled with the comforting aroma of baked cookies. But even that ate into the budget. I'd count pennies at the grocery store, opting for generic brands, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as Grace tugged at my sleeve for treats we couldn't afford. Thomas's support from Europe felt like a lifeline fraying at the edges. Our video calls, once daily, spaced out as his project demands grew. "Complications with deadlines," he said. His face tired on the screen, the time difference making conversations rushed. "How are the kids holding up?" he'd ask, and I'd recount small victories. Annie's first day on a spelling test, Grace's bedtime stories where she now giggled instead of cried, Hunter's reluctant help with dishes. But I'd gloss over the exhaustion. The nights when Grace wet the bed again, soaking through to the mattress, or when Hunter stared out the window, whispering questions about Janet that I couldn't answer. Thomas sent money when he could, wiring extra for clothes or school fees, but his offers to return home faded as the penalties loomed larger. "Just a few more months," he'd promise, his voice crackling over the connection, but I sensed a distance growing, like static in the line. The kids' traumas surfaced in waves, unpredictable and heart-wrenching. Hunter, the protector, bottled it up during the day, but unraveled at night, sitting up watching the door, his small frame tense under the blankets, as if Janet might storm back and snatch them away. I'd find him like that at dawn, eyes red-rimmed, and we'd talk softly over cereal, the milk swirling in bowls as he admitted fears of being too much trouble. Annie cried silently in corners, her tears leaving salt tracks on her cheeks, stealing bits of food even at home now, hoarding them under her pillow like treasures. Grace, the youngest, regressed sometimes, thumb-sucking, bed-wetting, clinging to me with sticky hands that smelled of whatever snack she'd just demolished. Scott connected us with a family therapist, sessions in a stuffy office where the air conditioner hummed, drawing out their stories in crayons and words. "It's progress," the therapist said, but it felt slow, like wading through molasses. By month 3, the strain showed in every mirror. Dark circles under my eyes, clothes hanging looser from skipped meals. I'd depleted my savings entirely, relying on the stipend and my dual jobs, the diner's neon sign flickering as I clocked out, feet aching from hours on concrete. One night, after a particularly rough shift where a customer stiffed me on a tip, I came home to find Hunter awake, reading by flashlight. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered, but his eyes held worry beyond his years. We shared a midnight snack of crackers, the crunch loud in the quiet apartment, and he asked about Thomas, when he'd come back, if he even wanted to. I reassured him as best I could, but doubt crept in for me too. Thomas's calls had dwindled to twice a week, his excuses piling up like unread emails. I finally tracked down Janet's ex-boyfriend, Damien, through a mutual acquaintance, his number scribbled on a napkin from work. He answered on the third try, his voice gruff over the phone, confirming what I'd feared. Janet had met a 19-year-old at a bar, ditched the kids because they held her back, and bolted to Vegas for lights and luck. "She's always been like this," he said, no surprise in his tone, just weary acceptance. It fueled my determination. CPS used it in their reports, bolstering my kinship status. But as spring turned to summer, Thomas dropped the bomb. His project extended, another 6 months at least. "Complications," he repeated, his image freezing on the screen mid-sentence. I hung up feeling hollow, the apartment's walls closing in, the kids' laughter from the bedroom a bittersweet soundtrack. Small joys pierced the chaos. Grace's first unprompted hug, warm and trusting around my neck. Annie's artwork taped to the fridge, colorful scribbles of our family. Hunter's rare smile when we baked cookies together. The kitchen filled with vanilla and warmth. Yet the underlying tension simmered. Bills stacking up, therapy revealing deeper scars, Thomas's absence stretching like a shadow. I filed for permanent custody after 6 months of silence from Janet, enlisting a pro bono lawyer from a family advocacy center. The process dragged, court dates looming like distant thunder, requiring more efforts to locate her. The Guardian ad litem's initial report recommended I keep temporary custody, citing the kids' stability with me, their improved grades, fewer nightmares, budding attachments. As fall approached, the first court date in September came and went, without Janet showing, the judge's gavel echoing in the sterile room as he continued the case. Thomas's calls grew even scarcer, strange questions slipping in about whether I'd heard from her. Little Grace by then struggled to recall Janet's face, showing her a photo she'd point at me instead. "That's not my mommy. You're my mommy." It warmed me, but also ached, erasing a mother, even a flawed one. The third missed hearing in December finally tipped the scales. The judge granted full legal custody after 9 grueling months. We celebrated quietly with pizza, the cheesy aroma filling the air, but victory felt tentative, like calm before another storm. In the quiet lulls between the daily grind, the wait for permanence felt like an eternity stretched thin, each day a thread unraveling under the strain of uncertainty. With full legal custody tantalizingly close, after those initial months, I dove deeper into the paperwork maze, my kitchen table buried under forms and notes, the scent of cooling coffee perpetual in the air. Scott from CPS became a regular fixture, his visits blending into our routine like an uncle dropping by, checking on the kids' progress, approving the kinship stipend disbursements that kept us afloat, albeit barely. He'd sit with Hunter over homework, praising his math skills, or play a quick game with Grace, her laughter a bright spot amid the tension. But beneath it all, the search for Janet loomed, a shadow that refused to lift until we could prove every effort to locate her had been exhausted. I spent evenings after the kids were asleep scouring old contacts and social media, my laptop screen glowing in the dim living room, fingers flying over keys as I messaged distant relatives and friends from Janet's chaotic circle. One lead pointed to Damien again. I'd spoken to him briefly before, but now I pressed for more details, calling him late one night when the apartment was silent, save for the hum of the fridge. "She's probably still in Vegas," he grumbled, his voice rough from what sounded like a bar in the background, clinking glasses and muffled laughter filtering through. "Met that kid at some dive, said the children were cramping her style. Haven't heard from her since, but if I do, I'll let you know." It wasn't much, but CPS noted it in the file, another piece in the puzzle showing her willful absence. Damien even offered to sign an affidavit if needed, his reluctant helpfulness a surprise that bolstered my case. Thomas's situation abroad added another layer of complication, his extended stay turning from temporary setback to indefinite limbo. Our calls, now weekly at best, carried an undercurrent of strain, his project delays cited as unforeseen issues with the team. But his tone held something unspoken, a hesitance that made my chest tighten. "Maybe another 6 months," he said during one grainy video chat, the European cityscape blurring behind him as rain pattered against his window. I'd update him on the kids, Hunter's improving grades, Annie's newfound love for drawing unicorns and vibrant crayons, Grace's bedtime rituals where she'd insist on 3 stories, her small voice demanding one more with a yawn. But I'd hold back the harder truths. The nights when Annie woke screaming from nightmares of being left behind, or Hunter's quiet questions about why their real mom didn't want them. Thomas sent more money, transfers hitting my account with notes like, for school supplies, but it felt like bandages on a deepening wound. Financially, the kinship program was a godsend, but it demanded constant vigilance, monthly reports on expenses, receipts for everything from diapers to dentist visits. I juggled my 2 jobs with precision, the diner shifts leaving me smelling of onion rings and exhaustion, while my day gig at the office blurred into endless spreadsheets under fluorescent lights. Savings gone, I cut corners wherever possible. Thrift store clothes for the kids, their excited tries-ons in the living room turning into impromptu fashion shows, laughter echoing off walls that had grown warmer with their presence. Scott arranged for subsidized therapy group sessions where the children learned coping skills through games and talks, the therapist's office scented with lavender to calm frayed nerves. Progress showed. Grace stopped wetting the bed most nights. Annie shared her hoarded snacks instead of hiding them. Hunter opened up about his fears in small bursts, like steam escaping a kettle. As summer faded into fall, the court process ramped up. My pro bono lawyer, a sharp woman named Elena from the Family Advocacy Center, guiding me through the hoops. "We need to demonstrate abandonment," she explained over coffee at a local cafe, the steam rising between us as leaves rustled outside. The first hearing in September was a sterile affair, the courtroom smelling of polished wood and old paper, the judge peering over glasses at the empty respondent's seat where Janet should have been. No show from her, despite certified mail and public notices. The guardian, Adam, a neutral advocate for the kids, presented her initial findings. Interviews where Hunter spoke of stability with me. Annie drew happy pictures of our apartment. Grace babbled about my new mommy. The judge continued the case, ordering more location efforts. Ads in newspapers, checks with social services in Vegas, even a private investigator on CPS's dime who turned up zilch beyond Damien's old tales. Thomas's calls took on an odd edge during this time, his questions veering into whether I'd heard whispers from Janet or her crowd. "Just curious," he'd say, but the lag in our connection mirrored the growing gap between us, his face on screen looking more haggard each time. His stay extended again. "Complications with funding," he claimed, and I swallowed my frustration, focusing on the kids. By October, they were thriving in subtle ways. School reports glowed with praise. Hunter joined a soccer team with stipend-covered fees, his cleats thumping on the field grass during practices I attended religiously. Annie's thefts stopped entirely after therapy breakthroughs, her trust blooming like the fall flowers we planted in window boxes. Grace, forgetting Janet's face, pointed at old photos with confusion, her finger jabbing at me instead. "That's you, Mommy." The second hearing in November dragged similarly. No Janet, more continuances, the judge's patience thinning, but protocol demanding thoroughness. Elena pushed hard, submitting evidence of the kids' integration, medical records showing caught-up vaccinations, teacher testimonials on their emotional growth, my own logs of daily life that painted a picture of budding family. The guardian ad litem's updated report was glowing, recommending permanent custody to me while searches continued. Nights after these days, I'd collapse on the couch, the apartment quiet with sleeping children, wondering if this limbo would ever end. Financial aid from kinship eased some burdens, extra for winter coats, the wool scratchy but warm as we bundled up for walks in crisp air. But the emotional toll mounted, my sleep fragmented by worries of what-ifs. The peace we'd carved out over those 9 months of custody battles shattered like glass underfoot when Janet resurfaced, her return as abrupt and destructive as her departure had been. It was 2 years and 2 months after that fateful midnight drop-off, a crisp June evening where the air hung heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine from the neighbor's yard. The kids had settled into rhythms that felt almost normal, Hunter turning 11 with a small party of school friends, cake crumbs scattered on the table, Annie's artwork evolving into detailed family portraits that included me prominently. Grace, now 6, chattering endlessly about her kindergarten adventures. I'd adopted them legally by then, the papers framed discreetly in my bedroom, a symbol of our hard-won stability. Thomas remained in Europe, His calls now monthly check-ins that felt obligatory, laced with vague updates on his endless project. But that day, everything upended. It started with a frantic call from the school principal as I was wrapping up my day job, the office hum of printers and keyboards fading into background noise. "Janet showed up at the front office," she said, her voice tight with concern. "She was intoxicated, demanding to see her children, screaming that you'd stolen them." My blood ran cold, the phone slippery in my suddenly sweaty palm. I raced to the school, tires screeching on the pavement, arriving to find police already there, their cruisers parked askew, with lights flashing silently. Janet was in the lobby, disheveled and reeking of cheap liquor, her eyes wild as she ranted to anyone listening. The kids had been kept in their classrooms, unaware, but the damage rippled outward. Whispers from staff, concerned glances from parents picking up their own children. She spotted me through the glass doors and lunged forward, banging on the window with a fist that left smudges. "You thief, give me back my babies." Her words slurred, spittle flying, the alcohol on her breath permeating even from a distance. The officers intervened, one gently but firmly guiding her away, while the other took my statement in a side office that smelled of stale coffee and copy paper. "Public intoxication," he noted, scribbling in his notebook. "We'll take her in, but you might want a restraining order." The school followed protocol, locking down briefly until she was gone, but the kids sensed the tension when I picked them up. Hunter's eyes narrowing suspiciously, Annie fidgeting with her backpack straps, Grace unusually quiet. That night, the apartment felt exposed, every creak of the building settling like a warning. I'd barely tucked the kids in, Grace clutching her stuffed bear, its fur worn from constant hugs, when pounding echoed from the door at 3 a.m. My heart hammered as I peeked through the peephole. Janet again, swaying unsteadily, her face contorted in rage. "Open up! I know they're in there," she yelled, her voice echoing down the hall. Hunter woke first, materializing in the living room with a baseball bat from his closet, standing protectively in front of his sister's bedroom door. "Stay back," he whispered fiercely, his knuckles white on the handle. I called 911, whispering urgently into the phone while barricading the door with a chair, the wood scraping against the floor. Police arrived swiftly, arresting her for violating the peace and attempted break-in, her curses fading as they led her away in handcuffs. The next morning, bleary-eyed over cereal bowls where milk sloshed unevenly, I explained as gently as I could. Janet was back, but she couldn't hurt us. We'd make sure of it. Their faces paled. Annie burst into tears, spilling her bowl with a clatter, while Grace hid under the table, thumb in mouth. Hunter just nodded, his jaw set, but later I found him punching his pillow in frustration. I filed for a restraining order that day at the courthouse, the clerk's sympathetic nod doing little to ease the knot in my stomach. The judge granted it temporarily, citing the arrests, the order a thin sheet of paper that felt flimsy against her chaos. CPS reopened the case briefly for safety checks, Scott visiting with a reassuring pat on my back. "You've got this documented, it'll hold." But Janet didn't stop. She filed a petition to overturn custody a week later, claiming she'd changed and deserved her children back. The court scheduled a hearing and ordered supervised visitation assessments at a neutral center, a bland building with toys scattered in a playroom that smelled of disinfectant. I prepped the kids as best I could. Therapy sessions ramped up, the counselor using puppets to role-play. But the day arrived like a storm cloud. At the center, Janet waited in a separate room dressed neatly for once, but her eyes held that same manic glint. When the kids entered, escorted by the supervisor, panic erupted. Hunter froze, Annie hyperventilated into sobs, Grace screamed and clung to the doorframe. No, scary lady," Grace wailed, her voice piercing. The visit terminated in minutes, the supervisor's report damning, severe trauma responses, recommendation against further contact. Thomas's apology hung in the air like smoke after a fire, thick and choking, as I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles aching from the effort. The apartment was deathly quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic outside, a reminder that the world kept spinning even as mine crumbled. "How long?" I demanded, my voice a raw whisper to avoid waking the kids, though every fiber screamed for answers. He sighed, the sound crackling through the line, and admitted it had started months before his Europe assignment. Janet reaching out desperate for cash, him meeting her in a dingy cafe to hand over an envelope, the conversation turning flirtatious over cheap coffee that burned his tongue. "It was supposed to be one time," he said, his words tumbling out like excuses rehearsed in the mirror. But she kept texting and things happened. I paced the kitchen, the linoleum cool under my bare feet, replaying Janet's smug laugh in the parking lot, her phone screen glowing with those damning messages. "While I was here changing wet sheets and soothing nightmares, you were what? Planning rendezvous?" Fury boiled over, but I bit it back, shoving my face into a dish towel that smelled faintly of dinner's spaghetti sauce. Thomas swore it wasn't an affair in the emotional sense, just physical slips fueled by guilt and her manipulations, but the distinction felt hollow. "And the baby?" I pressed, my heart pounding like it might burst. Silence stretched again, then he denied it flatly. "She's not pregnant with my child. We used protection, but honestly I think she's lying about the whole thing to hurt you."